This lecture screencast covers the growth of the United States as a global power, covering the years 1890 to 1914. The map on the right depicts the Western Hemisphere at the time of 1750. You see much of the Western Hemisphere dominated by different European powers. Latin America and South America are heavily influenced by the Spanish. The Portuguese also have a great colony in Brazil. In North America, the French and British have great control over large amounts of the continent, including what becomes Canada and the United States. By the 19th century, there were only 4 remaining European imperial powers in the Western Hemisphere. Great Britain still has influence over Canada, along with France. Portugal is still in Brazil, and Spain still has a vast influence over Latin America and South America, along with the Caribbean islands. But between 1890 and 1914, the United States emerges as an imperial power. The word imperial is in reference to another word, empire. An empire is basically when a country has control over territories that are outside of its normal territorial boundaries. Much of this growing territory emerges from the Spanish-American War, and following the end of this war, the United States gains control over Cuba, territories in Puerto Rico, the Philippines, Hawaii, the Panama Canal Zone, and many other Pacific islands. The Spanish-American War begins April 25, 1898, when the U.S. declares war on Spain, following the sinking of a U.S. battleship called the Maine. This happened in Havana, off the coast of Cuba, on February 15, 1898. I won't have to go into all the details of the Spanish-American War, but you need to know that the war ended with the Treaty of Paris on December 10, 1898, and as a result of this war, Spain lost control over many of its territories of its overseas empire, including Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippine Islands, Guam, and other nations. The picture on the right is of the battleship Maine, which was sunk by the Spanish off the coast of Cuba. You may wonder why the Spanish would sink an American ship. It was not without provocation. The Americans were trying to control trade within the Caribbean Sea, the Gulf of Mexico, and because this ship, the battleship Maine, was in territorial waters of Cuba, they saw this as an act of aggression, and they had to fire first. So it wasn't really a neutral ship coming into this area of Cuba. There was some passive-aggressive action going on from America. One other major component of the Spanish-American War was the Philippine Revolution. The Philippines had been colonized by the Spanish since 1565, so at this point it's over 300 years of imperial control. The Filipinos, who are the natives on the island, began revolting against the Spanish because of this 300-year colonial rule. And since we have a common enemy, we help to arm the Filipinos and also fight the Spanish alongside the Filipinos, but we fight them on the sea, whereas the Filipino nationals fight them on land. Now the Filipino nationals take care of the Spanish on land, and we in turn take care of the Spanish on the sea, and we basically decimate the Spanish fleet within a matter of hours. An unrelated topic to the Spanish-American War is the open door policy. In the late 19th century, China was so politically unstable that the world powers didn't even recognize it as a sovereign nation. So in turn, the U.S. tried to exert some influence in China, and Secretary of State John Hay proposed that the U.S. would have equal trading rights with all other nations in parts of China. This would include with the British, the French, and the Russians in some level. The U.S. did not want the Chinese countryside to be carved up and split up between nations, and we would also not want the other nations to have more influence over us in China. So this open door policy would basically split control between the imperial nations of the world. But when it was proposed, no other countries would sign on to the terms, so it was basically negated. And as time went on, as countries like Britain started pulling out of China, the U.S. gained more control and influence in China. And from this open door policy, China would remain unrecognized as a sovereign nation until after World War II. The next topic is the Roosevelt Corollary. Again, the U.S. is trying to gain control over the Western Hemisphere. And the Roosevelt Corollary is in response to the Monroe Doctrine, which was written about 75 years before. And the Monroe Doctrine basically stated that European nations could not intervene in the American continents. Although in 1823 that really only applied to countries that had colonies in the Americas. Theodore Roosevelt updates this with the Roosevelt Corollary and asserts that European nations should not intervene in any countries to the south of the U.S., no matter if it's a colony or not, because at this point it's really not. And under certain conditions, the U.S. might intervene because, again, these countries to the south of us are kind of seen as our little brother, and we're going to protect them from European intervention. The map that you see here is the American Empire as it has spread from 1857 to 1900 following the Spanish-American War. So you see here that the U.S. has some control over Cuba, and they build a naval base here. Puerto Rico, the Philippine Islands, the Aleutian Islands, the Hawaiian Islands, Midway, Wake, Guam, and all of these smaller islands to the south of that. So these Pacific Islands are now really spreading the U.S. to have some control over trade in Asia as well. And if you know history of World War II, these become sites of battles with the Japanese because these islands are contention for the Japanese because they want to control the Pacific Ocean. So as a whole, to wrap this whole thing up, the Spanish-American War, although it seems insignificant, the implications of it are really great because it does lead to other conflicts in the future. And that is all.